Greetings and welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this afternoon. We'll get started in just a moment. I think we're expecting a few more folks, so we'll get started in just another minute or two. While we're waiting, I encourage everybody to, if you could rename yourself under the participants list, you can do that by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of your screen. Hover your cursor over your name or whatever device you're joining from, and then click rename with your first and last name. That would be wonderful. Got a few folks logged in as things like home and others. And while we will do a round of introductions, it's great to know who's on the line right now. Okay. One other note, because we're a relatively small group, you can mute and unmute yourself. I would just ask that if you're not actively speaking, if you could keep yourself on mute to reduce background noise, that would be wonderful. And we'll go ahead and get started momentarily.
Ah, shit.
Hi, Kyla.
Hi, I lost you. Shit.
So again, just a quick reminder, if you're not actively addressing the group, if you could keep yourself on mute, that would be great.
Yeah, I can't find myself.
Oh, that's okay. I gotcha. All right. Okay. In the interest of time, let's go ahead and jump into it. Thank you all so much for joining this sixth meeting of the Stakeholder Committee Meeting for the West County Water Quality and Recycled Water Supply Feasibility Study. I'm Sam McGill with Sacramento State University. I've been assisting Sonoma Water and the Russian River County Water Sanitation District with facilitation of these meetings since, I think October 2024. There's a draft report out, which hopefully folks have taken a look at and are familiar with at this point, that we're going to spend the bulk of the day reviewing with all of you and hearing any comments you may have. But before I get into the agenda and our kind of desired outcomes for the day, I want to turn it over to Carlos Diaz. Carlos is the Deputy Director of Engineering for Sonoma Water for some opening remarks and importantly, also giving you updates on the recent spill from the district. Carlos, if you would.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to wish everybody a happy new year. Hope everyone had a healthy and restful holidays. As Sam said, October 2024, since we kind of embarked on this regionalization study, I want to really acknowledge and thank the committee for your continued involvement and support of the overall effort. I think we are nearing a significant milestone for the study with that draft report having been released for everybody's review over the holidays. Apologize for the timing of that, but hopefully everybody was able to find some time to dig into that draft technical feasibility study, and certainly, hope that folks are able to provide any comments that were not formally received during today's meeting. This is our sixth committee meeting. From here, we are planning on submitting that draft feasibility study report, addressing any stakeholder committee comments. We'll be addressing those with our consultant, West Yost, over the coming weeks, with a target submittal date to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. Looks like early February is a target date for that submittal to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, at which point we'll have a few months for the board to also review the report, with the ultimate goal of submitting our final technical feasibility study report at the end of May. I'll just jump into the spill because I know it's on everybody's mind. lot of press coverage of that event last week. Unfortunate timing, I would say, just with this draft feasibility study report kind of coming to its culminating end here. We probably don't have satisfactory answers for everybody. I know everybody's wanting to know exactly what occurred. We have kind of moved out of our response phase and will be moving into recovery phase here shortly, at which we will be asking the hard questions of, and trying to get to the bottom of exactly what occurred out there at the treatment plant. We do know that, we have experienced large storms in the past. I'm sure most folks in West County wouldn't characterize this as the largest storm. The river did, exceed monitor stage, but well below some of the stages that we've seen in recent memory. I will just, acknowledge, it's a complicated facility. It's got biology, physics, chemistry, all of the above. It's a complicated system, and when you're running systems like the Russian River Treatment Facility, and running the system kind of up against its upper limit, it is not unheard of for something to go awry, and one thing going awry can really throw things out of whack. So we are absolutely committed to finding out and getting a better answer of exactly what occurred out there. What we do know is that, we didn't spill anywhere in the collection system. So we were sending all those flows to the treatment facility. At some point during that storm, when we were handling large flows through the treatment train, we started to exceed turbidity limits, at which point we started diverting some of those non-compliant flows to emergency storage. And those non-compliant flows, in addition to the influent flows that the treatment facility continued to take on, at one point overwhelmed the available storage at the facility, causing one of our basins to start overflowing. Those flows, as I mentioned, were a combination of non-compliant flows and influent flows, the predominance of which were stormwater and not wastewater. But those flows were kind of traveling overland through the forested area between the treatment facility and the river. That's approximately a quarter mile that those flows were traveling overland before commingling with the river. I'm not seeing the occurrence of the spill as necessarily negating or changing any of the alternatives that we've presented in the feasibility study, or the conclusions that we're arriving at in the feasibility study. I will note that West Yost, as part of kind of analyzing what improvements would be necessary to enhance not only treatment, but the hydraulic capacity, kind of increasing the throughput at the treatment plant to accommodate additional community clusters and currently non-sewered areas, and be able to take on those additional flows at the treatment plant. West Yost largely relied upon a master plan that has kind of been moving in parallel track with this feasibility study. So a lot of the recommendations and conclusions that are in the feasibility study as to what would be needed at the treatment plant to accommodate additional flows are really based on those recommendations, findings and recommendations that came out of the master plan for the treatment facility. I think as part of our after action report, we will be revisiting some of those master plan findings and recommendations. And, I think we all have a renewed sense of the need for additional redundancy, resiliency at the facility, so that we're not really running things at the ragged edge in terms of maximum capacity. So that is something that we're committed to taking a closer look at, is where we could add additional redundancy, just so these unit processes don't get overwhelmed at some point in the future. So very committed to determining what exactly it is that occurred out there, committed to, implementing improvements at the treatment plant that will reduce the likelihood of this ever occurring in the future, particularly with, the possibility of adding additional flows. So certainly we'll take those into consideration and determining what could make this plant more resilient. And I'll just say, in closing, that the next phase of this is the project advancement report that the stakeholder committee will be playing a very critical role in determining what is needed to advance a preferred project out of the technical feasibility study. And we could certainly caveat some of these needs at the treatment plant as part of that project advancement report. So with that, I think I'll just let us get into the presentation today. Again, want to thank the stakeholder committee for sticking with us throughout this process. I know it's been a long process. We're nearing a critical milestone here with the technical feasibility study wrapping up, and really look forward to engaging further with the stakeholder committee as we begin development of the project advancement report. Sam, I'll turn it back over to you.
Carlos, and I know folks are probably have questions about some of the items you just said. If it's okay, I'd love to pause just for a couple of minutes before we get into the actual feasibility study itself. I do see a hand up from Rich. Maybe we can start there. Then if others have.
Yeah. Hi, Carlos. I just had a question here. In the past, the overflows at the treatment plant had been attributed to flooding of low-lying houses and water running into the sewer system from flooded fixtures. This year, we didn't have any flooding of houses. So is there any idea of why all of a sudden the system got surcharged and caused the treatment plant to overflow?
I suspect it's not related, directly to the flooding of houses, Rich, so much as just increased inflows from, high river levels, spread out throughout the collection system. So what we do know is that, our lift stations were running at full bore, and in line with, flows that the treatment facility has received from those lift stations in prior floods. Certainly acknowledging that we have had bigger floods in very recent memory. I think just last February's flood was several feet higher than what we experienced last week. The short of it is, the treatment facility was seeing those inflows, and running the unit processes at those elevated flows did result in us losing turbidity at the treatment facility, and ended up just losing the biology of the plant.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Well, let me put it another way. If the system is not being surcharged from the houses going under, why is all that water going into the system? I mean, it's supposed to be a fairly sealed system. Do you have any idea why it's taking on so much stormwater?
I think it might just be a nuance. I mean, when the houses are flooded, we do have backflow devices in the system that are closed down. So there's no additional flows coming, from those houses that are flooded. It's really just a function of elevated groundwater and river inflows into the overall collection system. It is something that we've been looking at. I mentioned the master plan at the treatment facility. We've also been conducting a capacity analysis of the entire collection system. And I will say one of the bigger kind of advancements in our understanding of the system is having incorporated not only kind of rainfall derived inflow and infiltration and how that impacts peak flows and capacities of the collection system, but kind of parsing out INI. So INI, inflow infiltration, in a typical system, it's rainfall derived. you have large rainfall events. You get some inflow directly into the system. You also have some infiltration occurring from elevated groundwater levels. This latest study has kind of parsed that INI into not only rainfall-derived INI, but also river-derived INI. And so and there's very different dynamics occurring between the two. And we've been able to kind of distinguish those. There is considerable river-derived INI, I believe, even at a monitor stage. The design flow that's been established as part of that capacity analysis does use that kind of monitor stage as the level that defines that design storm. So to answer your question, it was river-derived INI, I believe, in conjunction with rainfall-derived INI, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into all of that in the coming weeks.
I guess then what you're saying is that we can expect the system to overflow again if we have heavy rains, even though there's not a flood.
I would hope so. I would hope not, Rich. As I mentioned, we've gotten through bigger storms in the past without overflowing. And so really better understanding what was unique about this storm will hopefully lead to follow-up action items that will prevent this from occurring in the future.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. Thank you.
Another hand up from Steve Trippy.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Rich, for attacking the technical side of it, which as you know, I'm not versed with. However, I need to say, as someone who came into this as a volunteer 7 years ago, we've been told time and time and time and time again that any issues with the plant were related to the collection system and perhaps the lift pumps. This time, that wasn't the case. And yet here you have us advising a study that has prioritized connection to the Guerneville plant as one, if not the one, of the priority alternatives to consider. I think you're kidding yourselves. This plant's not working. It doesn't help to say maybe we hope any of that. I live downriver from the plant, as does a number of people on this call. It was shocking. We got out of a flood. Uh-oh, there's sewage running down the river in the middle of my house. We've got no notification from the county about anything other than the beaches are safe. But what do we do to clean up what's been deposited on our properties? Right? What do I do with all that debris? Am I supposed to touch it or not? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to throw it back in the river? Does it cause any harm? No word to any of us. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of us downriver from that plant. So I have two issues here. One, it's like, okay, I think we should stop wishing and hoping and praying that the Guerneville plant's going to get better. Because a while ago I was convinced, yeah, maybe it'll work. I'm not anymore. And I do not think you will garner any community support in the near term for an alternative that includes the Guerneville plant as part of the regionalization study. Nobody's going to support it. Zero. It's just not going to happen. So I think for the purpose of this group, look elsewhere. The other plans need to be considered, or consider the cost of doing significant, not maybe, but significant improvements. And you'd have to convince me and others, I think, that those improvements are, one, affordable, doable, not going to cost me money, and are going to get done. That's it. Sorry.
Thank you for that, Steve. I think as we get through the presentation here, and many of you, as you know, are broadly familiar with the alternatives already, and one of those alternatives is focused purely on using the existing facility with upgrades. So once we get to that portion of the presentation, it'd be great to revisit your comment, because I think it directly relates to everything that's in the study.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. All right. Any final questions? And I know that some of these issues are going to come up several times throughout the agenda today, but I do want to honor people's time and make sure that you have an opportunity to provide additional thoughts on the study and the alternatives itself.
Can I ask one question, please?
Sure, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Dave Upchurch, I'm with GCSD and a board member. And that is when you have houses that are underwater during a flood, that would seem to open up the collection system through the toilets and cause quite an increase in flow. Is that correct?
Yes, without the backflow prevention devices that were mentioned earlier.
Backflow, though, is the other way. It keeps the, I mean, to my understanding, our
It keeps it
backflow
both ways,
to
right?
keep the sewage out of the house through the toilet, but it doesn't stop the toilet from running sewage into the collection system. So if the river water is up over the toilets, then that toilet is just a big hole into the collection system. As the lift pumps are working and that flow is going, then it would seem that water would flow right down the toilets and into the system. Is that not a thing?
Not with the valves being closed.
Wow, okay. So what stops the valve from being closed in normal use? You know, when you flush the toilet, it goes down, right? And the anti-reversion valves are to keep the collection system from emptying back up through the toilets. But if you put the toilet underwater and the lift pumps are pulling through the collection system, then again, what stops the water from going down the toilet into the collection system through the pumps and through the plant?
A closed valve. It does essentially prevent flows from going either way, David.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, as I mentioned at the outset, really the goal here is to walk through the actual feasibility study, draft report, and review public comments received to date. But we also want to spend some time discussing with all of you any additional comments that you might have. I'll note, and I think those that have participated in this for some time, the deadline for providing comments was January 2nd. We do want to hear additional thoughts that you might have as well today, but the deadline for written comments was January 2nd. So we'll take a look at the comment that we received and get some additional thoughts that you might have before we close out. But that's kind of what we have on tap for you today. We will, as we've done at previous meetings, Stu will start out with a quick review of the project scope of work and the timeline. I think Carlos mentioned that there are some additional deliverables that we talked about at the outset of this process that will be included as well, including a project advancement report. And that's really going to be an important component of the overall effort to, and I think Steve kind of alluded to it, to build support for an eventual preferred project alternative and advance the project. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going to go into that as well. Our goal is to get you out of here by 6. I know we did. I'm glad that we were able to spend some time talking about the spill, since that's obviously front and center in people's minds. But with that, let's go ahead and get into it. We'll break for conversation throughout the agenda, as we always do. If you do have questions during the presentation, you're welcome. You are welcome to drop those thoughts into the chat. You can also use the hand raise feature at any time. You can find that by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. Let's see. I'm just looking through a couple of the comments that we received. Again, quick reminder, the deadline for written comments was January 2nd. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, let's go ahead and start into it. So first, I want to hand it over to Stu to walk through the project scope of work and timeline overview. Stu.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, yeah. So before we dive into the technical presentation, I would like to reiterate that the scope of work for this project is defined in the settlement agreement between the Russian River County Sanitation District and North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. The first component is a high-level feasibility assessment to evaluate potential regional project options. And again, this is not a final design, but rather an initial evaluation to understand technical feasibility, operational considerations, and relative costs. And the key deliverable for this phase is a feasibility study report, which is the main focus of today's presentation. And the second component is a stakeholder engagement. This portion is intended to inform stakeholders about the project, gather input, and help identify the level of community support for potential options. And we just heard from some of you that sending flows to the Russian River is not a very favorable option. The outcome of the stakeholder effort will be documented in a project advancement report, which integrates both technical findings and a stakeholder perspective. I will talk about this report at the end of today's presentation. And next slide, please. So very quickly, here you're all familiar with this slide. This timeline basically provides an overview of the overall project schedule, highlighting the key milestones, including technical workshops and committee meetings that we held beginning in 2024 and now extending through 2026. As I said earlier, for today's meeting in particular, our focus will be reviewing the draft feasibility study report and summarizing the comments we received from the stakeholders and walking through how those comments are going to be addressed in the revised draft that we are going to submit to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. Next slide, please. This portion of the timeline basically highlights the key deliverables and committee touch points as we move toward completion of the feasibility study phase and into project advancement report. We plan to submit the revised draft feasibility study report to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board early February. This version will incorporate and address all the comments we received. Following that submittal, we will hold a stakeholder committee meeting number 7, where we will briefly review the final feasibility study report and then introduce the project advancement report, which represent the next phase of work. The final feasibility study report is scheduled to be submitted to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board end of May 2026 to meet the requirements of the enhancement action. And then in the meantime, we will work on the draft project advancement report. We will review that report in a stakeholder committee meeting number 8, sometimes in August. And finally, the project advancement report will be submitted to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board end of October 2026, marking the conclusion of basically this project and enhancement compliance action. With that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks, Paris, too. Appreciate that snapshot, and it's always good just to flag some of the things that are coming up. We'll revisit, we'll have a brief discussion about the project advancement report at the end of this session today. But next, I'd like to turn it over to Catherine from West Yost to provide an overview of the feasibility study, as well as the public comments received. Catherine.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Just go ahead and move forward with the next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to give a quick overview of the feasibility study report, the information in chapters 1 through 8. Basically, we've gone through several of these meetings in the past. I will briefly touch on the conclusions, which again have been shared previously, but have now been summarized in the report. And then from there, we'll talk about the comments that have been received to date with a brief response to those. And then I think we'll open it up for additional discussion. Go ahead. So just again, stepping through each chapter. So chapter 1 is just an introduction to the report. It provides the regulatory background and the overview as to, the driver for why the report was completed. It defines what the approach of the study is, generally identifying that its focus is really to identify what the treatment and major conveyance would be needed to support regionalization. It does also establish what the study area is, which was a boundary defined specifically for this work, and in accordance with the ECA included the communities of Hacienda, Hollydale, Camp Meeker, and Guerneville. Next slide. Chapter 2 provides the overview of each of the existing wastewater sanitation districts that are in the study area. So that's Russian River, which throughout this presentation and the reports called RRCSD, Grayton Community Services District, GCSD, Forestville Water District, FWD, and Occidental Community Services District, OCSD. The characterization provided includes the boundary of the service area, the current and anticipated regulatory requirements, flows and loads, what's coming into those treatment plants or centralized facilities, what the existing treatment facilities are and what their capacities are based on known information. Discussion about the recycled water operations, and then a discussion about the opportunities and constraints for regionalization that were identified through discussions with folks from those agencies. Next slide. Chapter 3 presents the 8 alternatives that were identified for evaluation and does what's called an initial screening assessment of those. For each alternative, we identified the flows, the treatment facility improvements associated with those projects, what recycled water infrastructure would be needed, and what major conveyances would be required. And then we did an analysis. The table here shows the 8 alternatives identified. And then ultimately, the green ones shown were the 5 that were identified to move forward. The other point to note, and this is true for the entire report, that we did not address any improvements related to the collection systems for each of the agencies of interest. It was not part of the evaluation, and it was assumed that those projects would be moved forward separately and only the responsibility of those folks that contribute to those collection systems. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we in chapter 3, we screened everything down to 5 alternatives, and that was done against essentially 7 criteria. First, there were 6 qualitative criteria that were used to identify, which are shown in the table here, which were used to assess. And then we also did, I would call a pretty high level view of what the cost for each alternative might be based on what we knew the facility requirements are. But for this screening analysis, we ranked cost and qualitative criteria on a similar level. We didn't separate those out. We carried it forward. And the next slide shows basically, and through that we got down to the 5 alternatives, which had the highest ranking. Chapter 4, we did a further analysis then of those 5 alternatives. So basically what we did in chapter 4 was we took the 5 that came out of the screening analysis, and we did a more detailed cost analysis of those. So like I said, in chapter 3, we did a very high level assessment of what the cost might be. In chapter 4, we dug in and we assigned true cost values. And we gained a better understanding what the infrastructure needs and what the site layouts would be, as well as developed annual operating cost and life cycle cost. Next slide. And as a result of that evaluation, we were able to generate cost versus qualitative criteria scoring, which is shown on the graph here. As shown, so the best options would be those options that have a high qualitative score. So, up in the upper left quartile of and a low capital cost or low overall life cycle cost. So in the upper left quartile of the graph here. As you can see, the lower cost options didn't quite rank as high, but the highest cost options had a higher rank. Given that, we decided to carry all of the 5 alternatives forward into the additional analysis, where we also incorporated the unsewered communities and bringing their flows in. That would give us a better understanding of the total cost of each alternative with the unsewered communities. We also did some additional work in terms of understanding what the recycled water opportunities are in the area, which help us better understand the viability of each alternative. And then we also took a look at climate change resiliency and adaptation needs, which was an expectation of the ECA. Next slide. So as we started to get into assessing the unsewered areas, the first step was to identify what those areas are. And so we did a risk and opportunity analysis and scoring approach for each of the parcels within our study area to identify the parcels that had either the highest risk associated with flooding or impacts to their on-site systems, as well as those that might have the highest opportunity to connect to a regional system. And we use that to kind of identify the ones that made the most sense to incorporate as an initial first step. Once we did that, we identified all the clusters. There were 12 in total, with Monterrey Villa Grande being its own cluster defined through the Monterrey Villa Grande study. We identified flows and loads for all of the clusters, basically applying the similar approach that was used in the Monterrey Villa Grande study, just to make sure we were kind of evaluating everything on an equal playing field. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So this shows the results of that identification process with the 12 clusters that we identified and the approximate number of parcels in each cluster. Next slide. So chapter 6 discusses our recycled water evaluation. I mentioned we did some additional evaluation. So we reached out to some local landowners to better understand, what the demands are, whether they're agricultural demands, some of the quarry demands, and other things along those lines. We also evaluated what infrastructure would be required to return water if we exported it either to Windsor or Santa Rosa. Excuse me. I need to get some water here in a minute. If this cough persists, I'm sorry. And then we looked at just an external factor of whether the water balances were impacted by the requirement by the regional board to only discharge at 100 to 1 dilution, and whether that would impact some of the alternatives. So in the market analysis, basically, we determined that there is quite a bit of agricultural land in the Forestville Graton area, but it's largely and it's significantly dominated by vineyards, and that those facilities require very little water and on a per acre basis. And so trying to, go to zero discharge, you have no discharge to the river, by irrigating only vineyards would be very challenging and not cost effective, basically. We also identified that there's little to no agricultural demands in the Guerneville area, meaning that recycled water is very limited there. And that the quarries that are near the Forestville facility do provide a potential for year-round reuse, and that that as regionalization moves forward, that those should be something considered as a way to pretty cost efficiently expand recycled water demands. Next slide. In chapter 7, we took a look at the flooding impacts and how they might be impacted by climate change. And basically, key findings from this were one, both Occidental and Forestville facilities are not in an area that are potentially subject to significant flooding. The Guerneville treatment plant is subject to current flooding. It actually has flood protection already to protect it. But with climate change, the existing protection may not be adequate. But the creek along which it's located hasn't really been modeled completely for the climate change impacts. So additional work is really needed to understand truly what those impacts are. The Russian River plant, though, currently is protected from 100-year flooding, but a 500-year flood would inundate one of the 2 equalization ponds. And then with climate change, even under 100-year conditions, that pond might be impacted, and that an even larger portion of the plant would be impacted under 500-year. So long-term, additional flood protection is likely needed for this facility. And then we identified that a significant portion of the existing unsewered parcels are subject to flooding, and there would be modest increases in that with climate change. Finally, we did acknowledged in this chapter that, Sonoma County is going to face some shortfalls with water supply with climate change, and that the recycled water and the additional recycled water generated through regionalization would be helpful in the overall strategy to help mitigate that. So moving into chapter 8, basically what this chapter did is incorporated the flows and loads from the unsewered communities, as well as the additional findings that came from the 2 chapters I just discussed, to describe how the 5 alternatives would look like with all of the new information, as well as all of the flows. So we updated all the infrastructure needs and capital costs. We updated the site layouts, and we updated the annual and operating costs. The chapters organized, basically, we present alternative, and then we present a comparison of the alternatives. Next slide. So in this approach, again, same graph as before, where alternatives in the upper left quadrant of the map show the preferred approach. And in this case, we identified alternative 1C as the best alternative because it ranked very high, as well as had, the overall lowest cost, although, as you can see, not by any means a low cost. We did acknowledge, though, that alternative 1A had a comparable cost, but it ranked fairly low. And a large part of that ranking had to do with the fact that 1A was assuming that there would be zero discharge, which, while has benefits from a water quality standpoint, potentially in the Russian River, is very complicated, would be very complicated to implement because of what I said about the vineyards. The vineyards require very little water, so you'd need the very extensive, expansive reuse system to store and reuse all the water that would be captured under alternative 1A. And that over time, as if that facility were to grow, more homes come in, it's just going to get more and more and more complicated to kind of continue to maintain that zero discharge. So what we had said in the report that 1A would rank higher because some of those constraints that affect the qualitative analysis in 1A would go away. It may not be quite as high as 1C, but it would be higher than what it's shown here. We also noted that if 1A were to consider, and 1A being, with 2 local facilities, if 1A, instead of having zero discharge, had continued discharge, it would be less expensive, likely. overall than of all the alternatives. So it's possible, and again, we didn't evaluate this, but something that's possible that 1A could be higher qualitative score and lower cost score. And for that reason, we say that 1A should probably be continued to look at in addition to 1C, which is one facility at the Forestville plant. That both alternatives should really be carried forward as folks start to move this project forward. But in terms of the export alternatives, 2A, 2B, and 3B, all of those have significantly higher life cycle costs. And that based on the work that we've done here, exporting water out to Windsor or Santa Rosa is probably not going to be a cost-effective strategy for West County. Next slide. So with the findings and recommendations, which is the final chapter, we present the key findings for the 3 agencies that provide the treatment. So basically summarizing what I just said. We also provide some key findings just related to the overall analysis of and continued work to bring regionalization and to provide service to unsewered. One is that, through the work that we did we took a shot and I think made a good estimate based on a lot of good information about what the clusters and what the communities of interest would be for future evaluations. But we did want to note that there could be other areas that might need to be considered as projects move forward, and that, just the areas identified are not, don't consider the analysis that only those clusters should be sewered. That's not what we intended to show. Second bullet being that connecting existing unsewered parcels to a centralized treatment plant is definitely going to require quite a bit of multi-agency coordination, funding, partnerships, and new governmental structures, all of which must be figured out, and the scope and efforts associated with that were really beyond the purpose of this study, but that's something that obviously needs to happen. A key finding was that management and operation consolidation strategies. So if you've got a bunch of diverse clusters that all have small collection systems, and each one has to have its own management and maintenance system, it's going to be a lot more expensive than if there's shared resources across those clusters. So trying to, kind of tying the second bullet and third bullet together, looking for, partnerships and governance structures that will help, sort of create economies of scale and management of these smaller community collection systems is going to optimize efficiency. The fourth sub-bullet, that Sonoma County, in partnership with the communities, will need to take the lead for these further evaluations, and understanding what the needs are for the community clusters in particular. We really just did a high-level view of what those costs may be, but each community is going to be different and unique and have its own set of circumstances, and all of that has to be worked through on a community basis. We did identify that the local wastewater agencies that were really the focus of this study, they can support the county's activities and the unsewered community's activities by structuring planning efforts and future projects in a manner that provide for the potential to accept wastewater. And then finally, that another step that these agencies could take would be to, as this planning is being completed, to identify what they need just to maintain their own treatment facilities and maintain compliance, that taking an effort to identify what the cost and procedures be for connecting unsewered parcels and communities to their system should be done, so that when communities are ready and interested in connecting, there'll be a framework, or at least the outline of a framework in place. We also provided specific recommendations for each agency related to future planning that they need to do, and how that planning could be structured in a way to help support regionalization. Next slide. So maybe I'll pause there before we get into the public comments in case anyone has any questions about just the general presentation of the conclusions or the information in the report.
Catherine. So, as Catherine mentioned, we'll pause here for questions about the content of the report. The bulk of the time this afternoon is set aside for your additional thoughts and any additional comments that you'd like to provide. But we'd love to pause for clarifying questions about the material Catherine just presented. Rich.
Okay. It says it outlines a need for governance and the expectations there, but I just couldn't find that. So it seemed like governance is a critical issue. And was there any attempt made to contact Sonoma LAFCO or talk to any of the governing agencies about potential governance options?
No, that was part of the scope of this project. So we were in Chapter 9 just acknowledging that that work needed to happen, that was a critical step. But this work was really focused on the technical aspects of the feasibility.
Yeah, I want to add that we will include basically governance challenges in the project advancement report, and hopefully we'll find some ways to overcome those, but it's not part of this technical feasibility of the regionalization.
Steve?
I'm here. So the slide that's up, bullet 6, talks about local agencies could do a good job by identifying what the collection systems would look like. The Citizens Advisory Group that's been advising the plan of study in Monterey, Villa Grande, made the recommendation that we design a collection system to nowhere because we had lost confidence in the Guerneville plant as being that. The state then said, no, it has to be somewhere. So we said, okay, send it to Windsor. State said, no, we can't. I'm paraphrasing the history here. No, we can't. We're not going to go right by an existing plant that is authorized. I would submit that perhaps the folks who are on this call from the North Coast Board might want to think about, I don't know where we are with the plan of study designing a collection system, but we're there. We designed one 20 years ago, updated for 185 or 200 parcels out here. That information is there. I would encourage us to encourage the county to encourage that plan of study to do that consistent with this recommendation, even though it's not a local agency that's doing the planning. It's Sonoma Water is doing it on behalf of the state board and the county. So that's the only nuance there. So it seemed to us to make sense. Let's find out what it would cost to collect all this. Let's get it all close to where it might go somewhere, and let those that are doing this kind of work figure out the where. Would you support that as a recommendation? Not personally, but would you consider support?
I mean, I think that was somewhat the intent of this study, was to identify that. And I think, if you look at it from that perspective, then, we've outlined two alternatives. One which would go to the Russian River plant, which would probably be a much lower overall cost to
Well, we don't
the
know.
unserious communities.
We don't know what the cost is going to be now. I mean, that's the other part of this.
That is fair.
The other part of this is it's all moot at this point in terms of the current, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, then I think so. Then if that is the case, then all flows going to the Forestville plant becomes the preferred option, the 1A, and that alternative, similar to. I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind here is that in order for Forestville and Grayton to accept flows from Monterey, they also need to complete an upgrade to their facility
Right.
to allow for that, right?
Yeah.
That's fairly expensive And so I would postulate, if you knowing what Forestville and Graydon have to spend in order to upgrade their treatment facility to accommodate your flows, that if that money were put into making improvements at the Russian River plant, you would solve the Russian River plant problem tenfold. But that is to be studied and decided. And I think what we would recommend is, yeah, there's two options on the table. We do clearly identify Forestville as being lower risk and higher quality core because of the issues you're concerned about. And I think the communities probably need to take what is out there and into account, and possibly do some more technical work to dive into these alternatives to really understand. And I think there's information that came from this recent event, rainfall event, that better illustrates what might be needed, or further illustrates what might be needed at the Russian River plant. But my experience and knowledge, I work with a lot of treatment plants, and peak flows can be dealt with at a treatment plant. It's just, it's just a matter of understanding, what the situation is, and then identifying the engineering solution. So it's not an insurmountable problem at Russian River. Whether that's less expensive than building something at Forestville, I think it needs to be better understood.
Or invest dollars and resources in better managing and upgrading on-site systems. I mean, at a certain point, we're back there.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
A question from Kyla, and then we'll run through a summary of the public comment received. Kyla.
Thank you so much. Catherine, as ever, I so appreciate how clear you are in how you present items. It's really very helpful. I note that a couple of things. One, that the life cycle of the sewer systems with the hardware appears to be 10 to 20 years. And it appears that good septic systems have at least that much time, possibly longer. So I'm wondering why we're actually looking at creating a plant when we could consider each individual house to be its own cluster and have good systems. And also, in the event of a serious breach, such as what just happened, the breaches would be on individual parcels as opposed to the entire Russian River. So for me, really looking at what just happened and what is being proposed is I'm beginning to change my point of view about going to sewer, just because I'm really thinking about that. When I look at the cost of a good quality sewer, a good quality septic to the sewer systems, the septic system wins in terms of pricing. Those are my comments on this part of what's being discussed, and I thank you for your time.
Absolutely. I would just make only one comment about the initial part of your statement, and that is that whenever we do these life cycle costs, we look at a 20-year basis, but that doesn't mean that the treatment plant is only good for 20 years. There may need to be certain pieces of equipment that needed to be replaced in a 20-year timeline, but the vast majority of the infrastructure will last. There's treatment plants out there that are 100 years old. So it's just that so don't let that 20-year confuse you. It's just a very typical way in engineering. We look at things at these 20-year cycles in order to compare alternatives.
I thought it actually said that it would require replacement in 10 to 20 years.
No, like it might be that like a pump, for example. So if you build a pump station, all the concrete infrastructure, everything associated with it, some of that mechanical infrastructure will wear out eventually, but the station itself would function for much longer. Some of the electrical equipment might not even last 20 years. So when we look at like a 20-year, that's like, over a 20-year period, what would be needed. And then at that 20-year mark, theoretically, there's maybe a a slightly bigger investment, but generally is not the whole treatment plant has to be replaced.
Again, I understand that, but I also understand that when a treatment plant goes, or when individual hookups to the treatment plant go, that it's going to be significantly more spillage and also costs significantly more than a good quality septic system. And again, I have changed my point of view on this based on what recently happened. So, thank you.
Thanks, Kyla. All right. So let's take a look at the public comments. And Catherine, did you want me to go over the quick summary, or were you going to go over it? Either is fine.
I could do it. It's pretty straightforward. So we released the draft feasibility study for public comment on December 9th, which was shortly after it was delivered to the regional board, and provided about a month for comments to be received. And I think that we had sent out a request on the 9th and a reminder on the 19th, and we did receive one comment by January 2nd. And I'm going to just briefly go over as a multi-step comment, so I'll address several aspects of it. So the comment, it was in a letter from Dave Coleman, who's a Forestville resident and Forestville Water District engineer. The first part of the comment basically discusses that the resolutions address ratepayer costs and economy of scale by combining systems. And the analysis demonstrates that user rates could be less if you had a combined users compared to their existing rates. So basically, if you were in Forestville and you brought in flows from other users, the individuals in Forestville would pay less. And then so under alternative 1A, we see that savings. And then we also see that in 1C, where we have all treatment at one site. But we don't see that under the regionalization alternatives. And it was sort of speculated that had to do with that basically that the West County districts were estimated to be higher with those alternatives, and as compared to some of the local alternatives. And so it was speculated that had to do with, being given numbers from those agencies versus the fact that we were estimating costs. And with the next slide, I just bit of a response to that. Basically, so this is sort of summarizing what the commenter is saying. So you can see, but one of the things that really wasn't clearly shown in chapter 8 was what the current cost per user is. So for example, for a Russian River customer, their current costs are $2,300 a year. Under alternative 1A, where you'd bring in flows from Monterey, therefore spreading that out, it would go to $2,100. And then under 1C, which would be connecting to the Forestville plant, it would go to $1,600. But then in 2A, it jumps back up to $2,100. So it's basically equivalent, but it's not equivalent to current rates. It is lower than current rates. It's just equivalent to 1A. Forestville, we're showing, again, current rates, how that would drop and then drop even further, but then jump back up again, going out to the regional options. And then for the unsewered, for the regional options are essentially the same costs. And then, but the costs are lower. So I think I might have forgot to fill in a table there. But the bottom line is that it is recognized that, so this is comparing to going to Windsor. There's a couple nuances here, though. So the Windsor treatment facility, it's an advanced treatment facility. They're building a whole new treatment plant there to meet nutrient requirements. They're also planning a very sophisticated advanced biosolid system. And so the treatment that they have and the advanced biosolids handling that they're planning it's, it's much more advanced than, kind of the potential forceful grading system that we're looking at. I mean, they're similar. They're both brand new facilities, but it's just a little bit more elaborate and built out, kind of designed again for much larger community, much larger flows. When you have a much larger community like that, you can, do more. The Santa Rosa, which isn't shown here, but it had a similar cost as Windsor. Santa Rosa had for us identified a lot of new condition related improvements that were needed at their plant that aren't part of their current rates. And they don't really know at this point what those costs are. They haven't completed their own planning. But the bottom line is they are anticipating, much higher rates in the future. The other thing to keep in mind is that for Windsor and Santa Rosa, these are the rates that they have now that they've established based on their current population. They don't account for economy of scale. So if the entire West County were to connect to Windsor, for example, the cost for their facilities would get spread out over a larger user base. Potentially their rates would come down. I'm not sure of that, but I'm just saying that, it is a little apples to oranges because we are applying economy to scale in the alternatives we've evaluated, but the rates coming from those agencies don't account for that. So next slide. The other point to make, and this slide does have the number for the unsewered, but the other point to make is that, for Russian River, going back up to 2100 after it drops to 1600 just to go to Forestville, there is, the need to continue operating its system, its collection system, and then of course the discharge all the way out to Windsor. So there's added costs there. And then with Forestville, similarly, so there needs to, we're assuming that both the treatment plants are still going to have headworks, equalization facilities. They're going to need staff. They're going to have energy costs. They're going to be operating something at that treatment plant to export the flows. And for the unsewered communities, there is a reduction in costs potentially to go to Windsor versus, say, going to the Russian River plant. But basically, it is a complex system, and there's operating costs associated with both their collection system, the treatment, as well as the discharge of flow all the way to Windsor. So bottom line is, I think, just trying to show that, the fact that you don't see significant savings going out to Windsor isn't just a fact of, not having, reliable numbers. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but, based on what we're seeing, it's not going to be a significant savings, just given what would still have to be managed and operated in the West County area. Next slide. So then there were additional comments about a Russian River only option, which, given the information from the last week, maybe there's not much sympathy for this comment on this call. But basically he was suggesting that, having all treatment at the Russian River plant shouldn't have been ruled out so early. That it already has a lot of infrastructure there, and it would seem like that'd be a lot easier than building a whole new treatment plant at Forestville. That specifically that expanding would be easier. That Forestville requires that new outfall, which would be complicated to install. There was, mentions that, we identified a very low resiliency score due to flood and seismic risk associated with the Russian River facility, but maybe there wasn't enough information provided about that. And then we also gave all flows being treated Russian River a lower long-term regulatory compliance score. And again, I think it was due to some of these issues that just happened. And then that that option, and then he also mentioned again in the screening process that we carried forward an option to discharge to Guerneville and Windsor, basically having the Guerneville facility going out to the Windsor, and then but still having a local Grayton Forestville plant, and just basically noted that like it wouldn't make a lot of practical sense to have a pipeline going from Guerneville all the way out to Windsor and passing Forestville, which would potentially have a new treatment plant there. Like, why would you do that? So the next slide kind of gives a response to both of these comments. And basically just pointing out that we probably do in chapters 2 and 3, when we discuss the Russian River plant, we need to enhance those a little bit better to make it clear why that option of treating everything at Russian River was ruled out. First of all, the Russian River plant, as I mentioned, does have flood risks. And of course, Forestville has none. Russian River is also the plants in a very high earthquake liquefaction susceptibility zone. And the Forestville is a very low risk area for that. The space constraint. So the Russian River site itself, it's, surrounded by forest and it's on a hillside, and there's really not room for it to grow. And so, expansion to accommodate, in chapter 3, we really looked at just taking in Forestville and Grayton flows, but the idea that you could treat all flows in the entire project area and in that footprint of a site just isn't realistic. And finally, that Russian River itself is pretty far from the majority of the population in West County. So it just is not really an ideal location for, being a central regional plant. So probably speaking to the choir here, but there were a number of reasons. And I think just pointing out that these points will be brought out more in chapters 2 and 3 to address that question. And then alternative 3B, cannot argue with the logic there. That alternative was actually primarily carried forward because of feedback that came from the stakeholder group, with different stakeholders wanting to see, having different interests. So I don't think there's any changes required related to that alternative. That comment. Next slide. And with that, I think I will open it up. Can I get you guys to give me 1 minute? Sorry, I will come right back if we could just take 30 seconds. I've got this puppy that is trying to go outside.
So, just to kind of reiterate, we did only receive one written comment by the January 2nd deadline, but we want to set the remainder of the time aside for any additional comments you would like to provide on the draft study. And then we're curious to hear from you, based on everything that you heard in Catherine's presentation, from your own review of the study report itself, and potentially from the recent spill issue as well. I'd love to hear a little bit about which alternative resonates the most with you, given your understanding of the study's conclusions. I will note, just to kind of set that up, and I welcome staff to correct me if I'm wrong, but at your next meeting, we plan on having another poll just to sort of get the stakeholder committee's official stamp of approval on which alternative you feel really resonates with you the most. So we will have some poll questions for that next meeting, but just wanted to kind of cue it up now and get you thinking about that, given everything that you've heard. So we did want to open it up for discussion here, and I will go ahead and take a step back. I see Rich's hand up to start us off.
Okay,
Rich?
let me get unmuted. Yeah, I'd like to, well, first of all, I didn't receive this till December 19th. You said it went out on the 9th, but I went through all my emails, and December 19th was the first time I saw the draft study, at which time we were going into a big storm, and all our power went out for 3 days, and we we're cleaning up from flood and everything else. And frankly, with the holidays and whatnot, I didn't have a chance to respond. I think it would be courteous to at least extend the members of this committee a chance to have another 2 days or whatever to send in comments. So that was comment number one. Getting to section 9.2, the key findings for our RCSD. This thing to me is just sugar coated at best. It seems like a very ivory tower approach that's not at all related to conditions on the ground. It starts out saying our RCSD has surplus capacity to accommodate flows. Well, in dry weather, yeah. But as we've just seen, in the wintertime, it overflows. And it overflows with a relatively minor storm. This wasn't a big storm by Russian River standards, people. So I don't see how that finding is supported by actual evidence in the field. And you can't isolate the treatment plant from the collection system. The collection system is directly affecting the ability of the treatment plant to treat the wastewater. And to say, oh, gee, there's all kinds of capacity in the treatment plant. Yeah, there is, if you ignore the fact that Guerneville is connected to it. Then it goes on to say some condition-related improvements have been identified requiring a relatively modest investment in the next 20 years. Well, they need a huge amount of money. I've heard the figure $40 million tossed around. And we're going to take 20 years to correct all these problems. That's absurd. The whole idea, the CAG, we've consistently said, you don't solve failing septic systems by connecting to a failing treatment plant. And guys, we have a failing treatment plant. And I do not personally want to connect to a treatment plant where I pump my wastewater upstream only to watch it flow back down the river past my house. So I really don't agree. I think these key findings are shallow and poorly documented. And you've said many times, well, gee, it's only an engineering study. We didn't look at governance and we didn't look at finances. Well, governance and finances are critical to this whole process of looking at the regionalization of West County wastewater. And there probably are good governance options, but they haven't been explored. The financing, everything costs so much money in here that all seems like kind of pie in the sky. Probably, I probably won't live to see it. But and then the whole idea of expanding a discharge into the river. I know it only discharges in the wintertime, but our water wells are less than a mile downstream of where the discharge point is at Northwood. The plant meets standards that are adopted, but we know those standards are rapidly evolving. There's hormone disruptors, PFAS, other things that are appearing in wastewater that aren't addressed in the federal or state standards. And as far as having that running right past our water wells, that seems questionable. It's sort of I've said this before, it's a 1950s approach, just discharge the sewage into the nearest waterway, even though it's highly treated. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as a kid, the Bay was my playground. And all those sewer treatment plants down there were treating sewage. But I'll tell you, it was secondarily treated, and the mud flats smelled like sewage whenever we went down there. Obviously, our current conditions aren't that dramatic, but it could easily be happening in smaller quantities that aren't as easily noticed. So I really don't support connecting to our RCSD. You probably got that idea. And I really think we have a comprehensive system in the Santa Rosa Valley for reuse of wastewater with beneficial aspects for agriculture and electricity production. Why are we still looking at using our narrow river valley to discharge wastewater? So those are my comments. I'll leave it off at that.
Rich, much appreciated. Other comments or input folks would like to provide? Kyla, please.
Thank you so much. What Rich said, trying to look at this with failing power on a regular basis, trees going through roof houses, and needing to evacuate tenants due to a landslide. I unfortunately did not have time, and I don't mean that as a wimpy excuse. I'm just simply saying that it went to a lower priority, so my apologies on that. I did note that I have consistently talked about the issue of new construction and the assessor's reassignment of value on property with a new septic or also a new sewer system. And that truly concerns me. I think that until that is put into a study as a question or an issue, I can't support it. I think it really needs to be included and some sort of agreement needs to be made there. I agree with Rich that there's nothing on loans here. There's nothing on multi-units and how that would be handled. There's nothing about people who are really seriously low income that needs to be addressed. And I do think that relooking at creating good septic systems on properties may be a good solution at this time. I can't support going to the Guerneville plant. I think that there are countries that have amazing systems. Australia has amazing systems. I've been to areas of Africa that have really interesting systems that work. And I think that looking at series of systems, again, might be a really helpful thing. Because I think that in America here, we are not operating at the same level that other countries are. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
I'd like to weigh in a little bit. When we were looking years ago at putting a sewer system on Sheridan Ranch, it would have served, I think, ultimately 400 or 600 parcels, somewhere like that. And the cost kept going up, and we kept letting the taxes rise to accommodate that. Finally, PRMD threw in the towel. And at the point that they threw in the towel, I think I did the math one time, and it was going to, the cost of the plant was going to run about $30,000 or $40,000 per parcel, per parcel served. And at that point, at that time, that was pretty much what it would have cost to put an engineered system on those parcels. And so as the numbers go up and up, I think we have to really look is it competitive to just put an engineered system on every parcel over time as they fail and as they're needed, rather than try to assemble the capital costs for a pipeline to Windsor and a new plant or whatever. I think it's worth reconsidering that at this time. The biggest problem I see, and it certainly affects me personally, is that there are a lot of parcels that there aren't really satisfactory engineering solutions for. We would, my parcel to do anything that would be up to any standards would have to have our wastewater shipped off somewhere else. So, and it may be that at that point we look at those parcels and settle on what's the best you can possibly do there, and leave it at that. Because if most of the systems are performing to standards, then that's an improvement enough, and that the risks are very much smaller compared to spilling an entire sewage system. So my thinking on this is starting to move as well. Where before I was thinking, yeah, Guerneville plant is the only thing logical. I think we may have to accept the fact that there is no practical solution here, just given the size of the area served and the nature of the terrain and all of that stuff. We may need to take a fresh look at looking at individual systems. And as Kyla says, I mean, over the next 50 years, I'm sure that there will be more creative solutions, even for parcels that are currently impossible, because they are improving it, and we are looking at using less water. And I think that what this area needs is just a very creative solution that may not exist today, and may exist at some time in the future. That's
Thanks, Dan. Steve?
Yeah, real quickly, I want to respect that a lot of the comment that you're getting is from folks who have been dealing with how to solve a problem for an unsewered community that is in the scope of reach of your study, and that isn't the focus of your study. As I understand it, it's sort of initially is about how do we make these systems that are disconnected be better connected, or is there some way to do that? And I want to own that and say that. That said, having been through a number of different engineering processes and studies, it seems to me that we end up looking at the least imaginative result. You know, the one that requires not a new lot of new. Nobody suggested a purple pipe solution, right? Where I give you water, I get clean water from somewhere, I give you my dirty water, and I get some half clean water back, and I irrigate with it, which some communities do. It's never been looked at, as far as I can tell, just because I think it's outside the scope of imagination and a presumption of excessive cost. I don't think cost should be the only factor here. I think ongoing cost to homeowners should be, but if the ultimate cost that there's a big, big infrastructure cost that government needs to take on in order to create an elegant, long-term, safe, not, oh, I hope so solution, then we should be looking at that. And if that is to figure out how to go to Windsor, or how to get this stuff up to the geysers, or how to get all of this done in a different way, we at least ought to know what that is. I mean, Sonoma County leads the nation in many, many ways, and it seems to me that we're pretty backward on thinking about how we deal with our shit, pardon my French. But those sort of two things. One, I know this isn't your task. You were asked to look at these different plants and figure out how they can work together nicely, and look who you got on your stakeholder committee, right? 5 of us are on the study of Monterey Villa Grande. So we have that opinion. So I respect that and I look at it. The other hand is, let's get creative. What would it cost? What would it cost to do the best, most elegant, forward-thinking solution? You know, how would that happen? And then find some people of great wealth and great imagination that would want to help make that happen. Why not go that direction? It's about as doable as any one of these options, as far as I'm concerned, because they're not going to happen without bigger thinking. That's my thinking. Thank you.
Steve? Others who haven't had a chance to speak yet. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Great to hear from the county or our state reps. Todd, please.
Yeah, thanks. I've been taking a lot of notes here. I always appreciate the opinions that are being shared. Um, one thing that I wanted to appreciate about the work was how well the report followed the content that was derived at the workshop meeting. So when I was reading through the report, and I think this speaks to the quality of the work within the scope of the project. There wasn't anything surprising in the report that hadn't come up in previous conversations, and I know sometimes it's easy when you're putting those reports together to add some other afterthoughts in there, but I appreciated the organization of the content and how thorough it was and how well it tracked to the conversations that we had as a stakeholder group. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Todd. Carlos?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate everybody's comments, and I'm hearing, loud and clear the level of frustration that residents in the lower river are feeling, and after decades of trying to find a wastewater solution, I get that. I guess I just wanted to express a word of caution as we're moving into this project advancement phase, because I am hearing a lot of kind of burn it down to the ground sentiments. We'll just go about it our individual selves. And I think from a financing perspective, each individual landowner will have a much tougher time. I think, Dan, you hit it on the head. I mean, all of this has kind of been, brought about by, pathogens in the river. The fact that a lot of parcels out there in West County are undevelopable by, current standards. And I'm hearing things about, constituents. I'm not sure, people's individual septic systems, as fancy as you may want to get, are going to deal with PFAS and other constituents of concern. Certainly have evaluated going all the way to Windsor, going all the way to Laguna. It comes at a cost of an extra couple $100 million, right? I think there are tangible measures that could be taken at Russian River Treatment Plant that would make the plant more resilient, and be able to accommodate some level of regionalization. This study hasn't looked at the collection system. There's still work to be done, buttoning that up. But just wanted to throw that out there. I get the frustration. I'm hearing it loud and clear. I just hope that we don't overreact to this recent spill, and that we're able to kind of take some measured actions, recommendations towards ensuring that we prevent it from occurring in the future. And I think there is still value in considering the fact that we're all stronger working together as opposed to taking the individual approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos.
I totally hear what everybody's saying here. I do want to make a couple comments about specifically changes I think that are necessary to the report in chapters 8 and 9 specifically. So the analysis presented in that report is based on the master plan work that is being conducted by others. So with this bill that's happened, it's likely, I mean, based on what I know, what I've seen, there needs to be some relooking at some of the things that came out of that report, and I understand that work is still under contract and being worked on. So that work needed to identify those improvements to figure out, what would prevent what happened this week from happening again. Which I said, as I mentioned earlier, there is an engineering solution to that. What that would cost, what that is, again, something that's going to take some time to figure out. Way beyond the time we have to finish this report up. So what I'd like to do, what I plan to do would be to incorporate basically discussion about, that this recent event may result in changes to the conclusions in the report in terms of the cost associated with making improvements needed to accommodate additional high flows. And that needs to be looked at if that alternative were to move forward. So unfortunately, I can't assign cost to those right now, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that those costs will go up potentially with what happened. I think so. I can't completely eliminate, can't completely change the analysis, but at least acknowledging that. And I think to the point that was made about, connecting to Windsor, which is probably your best bet for connecting to the geysers, which would require a much larger pipeline, to be built to go to the geysers. I know Windsor is struggling with trying to figure out where their flows can go and whether, they're limited in what they can do right now, which is one of their hesitations to even take on West County. But I think that there's, with infinite money, you could definitely connect to the Windsor plant. You could have, the most advanced treatment. You could have connection to the geysers. Unfortunately, that kind of money, though, may not be available. And so I think that's, as engineers, we're always struggling with that. But I think, that it is laid out there in the report, but I'm not sure that, typically we don't pick the most expensive alternative, even if it is very high ranked, which is the case for that option. I don't know if that gives you any resolution, but it is what it is. But anyway, I don't know if I'm hearing any other comments that are going to significantly change the contents of this report. I think they're all valid, but I'll let Sam comment on that. But I did want to say that there will be some edits based on the comments received today.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, sorry, I'm not finding my raise hand feature for some reason. What I wanted to know, Catherine, was I recall at a previous workshop that you had said something to the fact that, with all of these alternatives, they're going to all meet a certain bar, which is that they will be meeting environmental permit compliance. And that was something that all the alternatives moving forward were going to be meeting once the identified improvements and capital needs and all that stuff were implemented. And I would be interested in seeing sort of that analysis strengthened in light of the recent spill. Just I'm hearing that this storm wasn't the largest that we've seen, and this spill did occur. Just I'd be interested in seeing that analysis kind of strengthened, whether, again, I think tying to the looking at resiliency of the plan and things like that, whether what you've laid out in terms of the improvements that would be needed is still meeting that is going to meet environmental compliance on day one kind of bar.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was alluding to, that, the district getting a separate master plan that looked at hydraulic capacity of the plant and identified specific improvements needed that would allow 5 MGD to be treated in the plant, and considered how much equalization volume is available. In light of what happened with this storm, my recommendation would be that analysis, again, which we didn't do, but that part of the master plan be revisited, that it be looked at, is there enough equalization capacity given, other limitations, or was part of the problem, was it operational? Were there other things happening that resulted in that? Was it the fact that it was multiple storms back to back and the work to date really didn't look at that. So I don't know the answers to that. I didn't do the work. And I think that getting to that answer is, like in that master plan scope of work, not in ours. But I think that what all we can do is just acknowledge that it appears that there is potentially more improvements needed, and that maybe add a recommendation that, the master plan work further investigate what happened and revisit the conclusions about what's needed at the plant to address peak flows, because it was identified, that again, right now the improvements to pass 5 mg are not in place. I think that's the other thing to keep in mind. So I think there's that piece as well. But whether there's enough equalization capacity with 2 weeks of back-to-back storms, even if they're not that significant, probably needs to be looked at. So I don't know if that really answers your question. I just don't think that we didn't do the equalization analysis in the first place. So I can't really commit to figuring out that problem. But I can commit to acknowledging in this report and making recommendations to do that.
Thanks, Catherine. And kind of along those lines, Andrea, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I know there were a few comments.
Let's see. I want to appreciate Rich's suggestion on extending the deadline. So if the committee has some comments that they'd like to send to Paris, Stu, and I by the end of the week, we'd love to have those. So if you have any feedback in addition to what was said this evening, again, please send Paris, Stu, and I your comments by the end of Friday.
Thank you.
Right. Any additional comments on the draft feasibility study that you'd like to share? Okay. Well, if you do have any additional comments, we'd certainly love to receive them again by close of business on this Friday, January 16th. Brenda, I'm not sure. Did you have a hand raised? Is there something you wanted to provide? There we go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to plug in here. I unfortunately have had an accident and I'm in pain and I can't possibly get comments. Plus, I want to do extensive comments. I don't want to write just 1 page or 2 pages. So anyway, I can get an extension on that.
Brenda, it's Andrea. Why don't I give you a call or send you an email? We can find a time to meet and maybe I can get some notes from you.
Okay, I'll talk to you further about this.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Brenda.
Can the report be resent or a link resent?
Yeah,
I'll
resend everything immediately following this call so you have it right at the top of your inbox.
Thanks.
Of course.
Sam, I have a comment. There is a phone number on the attendee list. Do you know who that person is?
No, I welcome whoever's joining from 695-0148. I'm not sure if you had any comments. I will note if you're just dialing in and you're on mute, you can unmute by pressing *9.
Yeah, Sam, this is actually Aaron Fulton from Sonoma Water.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks so much. All right. So Anne just posted the link to the full report in the chat. I will also I'll forward everybody the email that we sent out at the beginning of December, so that you have the links and the links to the Google Sheet to provide your comments right at the top of your inbox. Let's go ahead and keep moving for now, and I want to turn it back to Peristu, I believe, to walk through this slide.
Yeah, so the next phase of the project is the preparing the project advancement report. And this slide shows what we are proposing to include in that report. We will start with a brief introduction, summary of what we learned through the feasibility study. From there, the report will include the feedback you shared with us throughout the process. We'll also look at potential funding options and lay out an implementation plan, including governance needs and key considerations for how these regionalization projects could move forward. Your continued involvement is very, very important as we put this together. We anticipate to send out several emails and updates as we work through different sections of the report. And we will be, again, looking for your input along the way. So please stay tuned. So as I said, in the next stakeholder meeting, we are going to have more discussion about this project advancement report and what needs to be included in each chapter. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to you, Sam.
Thanks, Peristu. And I know when we had met offline, we were targeting likely kind of the April timeframe for that next stakeholder meeting. Is that correct? So
Yes.
for everybody that's been a regular participant, you'll note that this was the final meeting we had scheduled. We'll be reaching out to you very soon to get that April meeting booked and on your calendars, so that so everyone has it right in front of them. Any questions about the project advancement report? I know, there's a number of things that have been brought up today in today's conversation that will certainly have a home in the project advancement report, but we do have a few minutes left if you have any questions on this next phase of the effort.
Can you remind us who the audience is for this report?
So the report is supposed to be submitted to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right. Any final thoughts by members of the committee before we wrap up? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining again. Be on the lookout for an email that I'll send you very shortly that has, again, just the instructions on how to submit additional comments. And like I said, we'll be in touch very soon about scheduling that next meeting. At this point, I'd like to hand it back over to Carlos and staff for any closing remarks before we. Oh, and I'll note that we're also joined by Kent Gilfie from Sonoma Water. Any closing thoughts that any of you would like to provide?
Sam, thank you. If you don't mind me jumping in, I will here.
Great.
And I apologize to everybody that I was unavailable for the first part of this meeting. So I look forward to some download from some staff as to what transpired in the early part. But I just wanted to reiterate thanks for all the comments and the feedback. A lot of good feedback for us to consider there, particularly as I think about the project advancement report. Maybe that project advancement, whereas maybe ideally we thought that project advancement report will be, okay, well, here's the preferred alternative and here's how we propose to move it forward. Maybe there's going to be a bit more influence in the direction of here's what more needs to be looked at before a project can be settled on. I don't know, but that's what we will be weighing or can be weighed as part of project advancement. So your feedback's been really helpful on that front. So very much appreciated. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Kent. If there are no other comments, we'll end just a few minutes early today. Be on the lookout for those materials that we mentioned earlier. And again, thank you all for joining. We'll go ahead and close out for now, though.
Thank you.
Appreciate everyone's input. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I
Thank you.